Hi, welcome to Talk About the Passion, episode 15. My name is Christian Campagna, and what you are listening to is a weekly interview-based podcast where I talk to people from the creative world about their journeys in music, film, writing, tattooing, anything really. There's been a slight bent towards people from the punk and hardcore scene, but if you look through the earlier episodes, there's certainly a couple of exceptions to that. And of course, that's how I'd like this podcast to be, people from all over the map. So as I go along and record these, I'm hoping to broaden the type of guests I have on. Episode 15's guest once told me she forwards through these intros, so I'll make this one quick. Today's conversation is with my good friend Angie C Shaw. Angie is a DJ here in Boston, Massachusetts, currently on the classic rock station WZLX 100.7, but most known for her time WFNX and what I would say was their best era, the early 90s, just as Nirvana hit through the early 2000s. This was a great conversation. Angie's a close personal friend of mine, so it was an easygoing conversation. And as you'll see from listening to her, her lifelong passion for music and sharing it with other people and talking about it is a big part of her personality. After the conversation was done, we actually talked about an idea I had for an anniversary episode that I think will be pretty cool, but we'll talk about that another time. You might be wondering how to find me. Well, my main page is podbean.talkaboutthepassion.com. As for social media, I'm on Instagram now as well as Twitter. Twitter is @TATPpod, and my Instagram is @TATPpodcast. I have a Facebook page, facebook.com, TAP Podcast. And, of course, you can, subscribe to this on iTunes, Google Play, or whatever your favorite podcast listening place is. If you or someone you know would like to be on the podcast, please contact me at any of those social media sites, and we'll set something up. Thanks again for listening, and here is episode 15 with Angie C Shaw. Thanks. So I'm here with my friend Angie Shaw, and we're here to talk about music. And
we're in my closet, which is awesome.
And so I've known you since probably the 80s, I guess.
Yeah, I think. Well, I knew of you,
yeah.
And I was friendlier with your brother through FNX for a bit here and there. But I was trying to think of what my first memory of you was.
Yeah.
I definitely saw you out and about at shows. I remember the flight jacket and the whole, you know what I mean? Like, you were like my ideal hardcore crush, from afar kind of dude, because, I was part of that whole scene as well. But so I feel like we really didn't connect and talk until you guys were, Black Barbie was in the Battle of the Bands at WMWM. And I don't even know if we were still in college at that point, but right. I was a judge. Yep. I have a feeling that I had already graduated and was being brought back as like a quote, so I'm using air quotes, celebrity judge.
Right.
And that's how we became friends, like bona fide friends.
Yeah.
And of course, then we lost touch, and I went off, got married, had a kid, and had a completely secret other life. And then we reconnected on Facebook. Yeah. Oddly enough.
Yeah.
As I was in the throes of my divorce.
Right.
Oh, hey, Christian, how are you? Like you commented on, or I commented on somebody else's page or whatever, and that's how we started talking again and got back into each other's lives. So. Yeah,
and then we
we briefly dated.
Yeah, and that was
good. Do we call it dating?
I don't think
sure.
So.
Well, listen, when you are in the middle of a divorce and there's that whole mania that goes with it and whatever, I think you reach out to people and you have connections, and we connected, and I think it was you have the dubious honor of being the first person that I was romantically entangled with post divorce.
Yeah.
But then I think we soon figured out we were better off as friends.
Yeah.
Like that was pretty Yeah. But that's what happens with people that you crush on from afar.
Yeah, once you realize.
Once you get in the same space and you're like, hey, maybe maybe we're not.
This guy's kind of a nightmare.
No, it wasn't that at all. I think you have many subtle layers, and I was not in the mood for many subtle layers then. I was, because I was a newly single woman.
Right.
So it was just... I'm so glad that it went the way it did, though, that we are awesome friends now. Like, I consider you part of my family.
Oh, definitely.
So, I'm happy. I mean, as our significant others are sitting downstairs, and we're holed up in a closet right now. Like, I couldn't be happier with the way things worked out. So.
Correct.
But yes, full disclosure, we did sort of date.
Yeah. So we'll go backwards now. And
yes, please.
So where did you grow up?
I was from two parents from Danvers. So I was born in Beverly Hospital, as pretty much everybody who grew up on the North Shore of a certain age was. But we moved to Salem from Danvers when I was in the middle of first grade. We moved to Witchcraft Heights. So I went to Witchcraft Heights Elementary School and fully embraced the Salem everything.
Yeah.
And I was the oldest of four. My parents were young, and I was taking care of my siblings pretty early on. And my dad, I was really lucky. My dad was a huge music guy. Mm-hmm. He came from a big music family. His dad and his uncles were part of a barbershop quartet.
Oh, yeah.
His uncle Dick Creedon was a very famous jazz trumpet player in the area, has an album, went and did big band stuff. So that was always sort of in the ether. Mm-hmm. And when my dad had come back from Vietnam, he had been exposed to Motown and, bands that otherwise a kid growing up in Danvers probably wouldn't necessarily be into. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up playing with his albums, from the jump, like Edgar Winter and Dr. John and Wings. And, they were all like toys that I played with. So I just had that connection from day one. And my mom loved music too, but my mom was definitely more of a top 40.
Right.
I remember her going bananas over the Flashdance soundtrack and stuff like ABBA. She was a huge ABBA fan. Right. So I really got both sides. Yeah. And, it just went from there. I always wanted to play music. Yeah. But, I grew up really sort of lower middle class. Mm-hmm. By the time my brothers and sister were older, my parents had discovered credit cards and whatnot. So they didn't grow up quite as poor as I did, I feel, in a way. Yeah. So I just never had the luxury of learning how to play. Yeah. And, the schools had programs, but by the time an instrument was handed out to me, it was the alto clarinet or something. It looked like a huge saxophone, which is pretty much the non-sexiest thing you want to play. And I was like, I think I'll pass. Maybe not. Maybe next time around. But so music was a big deal very early on. However, I didn't have older brothers and sisters, but what I did have was I had young aunts that were almost like older. Yeah, yeah. Who would go out and get stuff when I asked for it. But my cousin John, Walsh, who was 3 or 4 years older than me, he was into Kiss. Oh, yeah. He was into, I asked for double platinum as a birthday gift and just tore that thing apart, you know. I used to even... draw trace over. You remember how you could, because it was raised. Yeah. And I was obsessed with Ace Frehley because AC were my initials, so he was my dude. And I just totally had that connection. Of course, a million years later, I got to hang out with Gene Simmons before he turned into a total fucking asshole. But so that was so I had a lot of help ushering me into being a music fan for sure.
Yeah. And did you so was radio a part of that? Radio switches?
Yeah, it was. I found out very early on that I could call a hit. Yeah. Which, that, as we say in the business, I had a set of ears. Yeah, yeah. And I knew that because I would listen to Kiss 108 on Sunday nights when they would play the new music. Oh, yeah, yeah. And I heard this song by this Boston group called Candy Girl. Yeah. And nobody knew it. It was brand new. Yeah. And I remember bringing it to the schoolyard and telling the kids that this was going to be a hit. Yeah. And so I don't know. A good song is a good song is a good song, regardless of genre. You can kind of tell when there's a bona fide hit happening. And so there was that, and then there was also I used to do radio plays for projects. Oh yeah. My dad had told me about when he grew up. and they had like the Lone Star, or not Lone Star. What is it? The radio teledramas or whatever. Lone Ranger. Sorry, Lone Star. It's totally mixing sci-fi.
Yeah.
Lone Star. Lone Ranger and stuff like that. So one of my early book reports was an audio book report. My parents helped me, and we did a thing where it was the Lone Ranger stopping a train robbery. Oh, yeah. And we had a van, and my parents went out and recorded the van door opening, so that was like the train. Right. And I remember like my dad banging the counter with something so it sounded like gunshots. We did the whole thing together, and it was a defining moment. It was one of those things where I had my parents all to myself, which was not often. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of sealed the deal too. And here's the kicker. I didn't know until many, many years later that my dad had gone and interviewed at whatever the broadcasting school at the time was in the mid-'60s. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be an on-air radio personality. Oh, yeah? He never told me. Huh. We never talked about it until I was full-time on the air at FNX.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, and he was like, I actually went and signed up. I was going to go to broadcasting school, and then I decided to enlist in the Air Force and go to Vietnam.
Interesting.
And I was like, are you kidding me? So you wonder how much of that is in your DNA and gets passed down without you even knowing it, you know? So I guess it was predetermined that somehow radio would be in my life. Yeah. So,
Does that Lone Ranger tape still exist?
I don't think so. No. It's possible. Right. My parents are total pack rats. It could be in the house somewhere, and maybe someday I'll find it and forward that to you. But yeah.
Did you start getting into the Boston radio? I feel like Boston radio has this rich history of great DJs starting way back with Peter Wolf, and then at least when I listened to it in the 70s and 80s it was Charles Laquadere and Dwayne Glasscock
and the interesting thing about that is I never listened to BCN.
No.
I know this is so heartbreaking to so many people, but for me, I tried to listen to BCN and it was Parento, liquor in the front, pucker in the rear, and I was like, I don't think this is for me. I grew up listening to BZ with my parents in the car, and I listened to COZ, Kick-Ass Rock and Roll. I mean, I had that bumper sticker on my wall, and that I loved all that. And then I started listening to Boston Phoenix radio before it was even called FNX, because they were playing shit like Licensed to Ill from the Beastie Boys, and yet they were still playing things like Prince or whatever. So, and I used to tape off the radio, and that was early high school, even middle school. I mean, I was, obviously I was influenced in one way or another because I was into the Jay Giles band and, early Aerosmith and stuff like that. But I think that had more to do with COZ. And then immediately bouncing over to what would become FNX.
Right. Yeah. Was that LYN at one point?
LYN was part of the building, and I think that's what we ended up calling Crazy Haitian Radio, but it may have initially been those call letters before they officially became FNX. But it was started as an extension of the Boston Phoenix newspaper. It was just Stephen Mindich wanting to sort of have another arm in his, dynasty media. Or whatever, and media. And also that he could have a radio station that he could pop on whenever he wanted and give his opinion. I mean, who wouldn't want to whenever he's,
Yeah.
So, if it was LYN, I think it was short-lived, and that was before my time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up a listener.
Yeah.
And then ended up being on the air there.
Yeah. So how did that road start? In college?
Yeah. So I was, this is another really funny, can't believe it's true, but it's a true story. Mm-hmm. I decided I was going to Salem State because most people with C grades and not a lot of, chutzpah in the academia world, my parents said, we'll pay for college, but only if you prove yourself. So you have to go to, Salem State for a year and then we'll take out loans or what have you. Which is a very often quoted tale around these parts, but you end up staying. I went to Salem State and I wanted to be a journalist. I had a typewriter. I was going to write. I was going to travel the world. That was my jam. That's what I wanted. So I walked into the student union. I walked down to the basement to sign up at the Log, which was the Salem State newspaper. I don't even know if it's still called that. That's a terrible name for a newspaper. And there was a woman behind the desk, and she was just busy doing her thing and wanted no part of me.
Yeah.
Like, at all.
Yeah.
I couldn't even get her to, like, look up and talk to me.
Yeah.
So I walked across the hall to WMWM, which was the radio station.
Yeah.
And I had a cousin through marriage that was working there, Michael Bornstein.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the fish in water.
Yeah.
For the first time in my life, it was that moment. It was a defining moment.
Mm-hmm.
I walked in that doorway, and within a couple weeks, I had my own show.
Yeah.
Within like maybe a month or two, I was the assistant program director.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, I was the rap director,
Yeah.
like before it was cool and called it hip hop.
Right.
And that was that.
Yeah.
I was off and running. I mean, to the point where I was out on academic probation at least twice because all my time was spent.
Time at the radio.
But you also have to remember, it was like 1988,
Right.
1987, 1989. I mean, big things were happening around
yeah.
here musically, and I was part of history, so who gave a fuck about
Right.
classes?
I know,
Like,
right.
8:30 geology lab? No, thank you. Like, I'm
Right.
like going to see Nirvana at Man Ray. I
Right.
got shit to do,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Did you do you remember the very first time you were on the air?
I do. I
Yeah.
played the Lemonheads,
Yeah.
Hate Your Friends,
Yeah.
which
And
is
what time-
fantastic.
What time was your slot?
That I don't remember
Yeah.
because I'm pretty sure I jumped all over. I
Yeah.
remember that I played the Lemonheads. I played like Screaming Broccoli or something like that, and then
He's a
there was
Vermont man, yeah.
there was a cover of Eleanor Rigby, like a punk rock cover of Eleanor Rigby, and I remember playing that and my dad being like super impressed, and I was like, yeah. But I distinctly remember the Lemonheads, Hate Your Friend, which was a slip cue. It was vinyl. We were still all vinyl. CDs weren't really out yet, which, oh God, how old am I? But that was the first one. And the funny thing is when I finally got my own slot and my own show, it was called You'll Dance to Anything. And it was all dancey,
Was it?
like Dead Milkmen
Right.
and you know, dance remixes, Depeche Mode or what have you, because I hadn't yet been really bit by the hardcore bug, which is funny because I had flirtations over the years. Like I can remember moving with my parents to Salem, and so this is probably 76, 77, sitting on the floor with my mom because the furniture wasn't there yet, but the TV was.
Yeah.
And I saw this group on TV on the news, and I was like, Mom, who is that?
Right.
And she went, those are the Sex Pistols, and they're disgusting. And they wipe their noses on their sleeves, and we're changing the channel. So I was like, file that away for later, because that looked amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Rock and Roll High School was on cable every 5 minutes, so I was like, I want a Ramones record. But my Auntie Lily went and got me End of the Century, which is pretty much the worst Ramones record to start your Ramones career. Yeah. So it's like that quote from Kurt Cobain when he's like, I'd heard all the shit about the Clash.
Right.
So I went and got the Clash, but I got Sandinista.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you're like, not really the greatest thing. So while I had those little dalliances here and there, it wasn't until a fateful evening where I was friends with Amy Davis, who was the music director at WM, and she said, listen, come to the show with me. I've got to interview this band. Yeah. And I was like, okay. So we go to the channel, and the band is Gangrene.
Yeah.
And Joe Gittleman from the Boss Tones was in the band at that point. And the opener with this band nobody knew called the Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh, yeah.
And this is my first punk rock show. Yeah. It's my first time at the channel. It's my first time hanging out backstage with bands.
Yeah, yeah.
Members of Malaya Rage were there as well. We were all cracking up because we were all November birthday babies.
Oh,
and, we helped Johnny Resnick from the Goo Goo Dolls put toothpaste in his hair to spike it up. And it was just that first time you hang out with people and then you see them on stage.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's life-changing.
Yeah, yeah. It was
know? And I went home the next day and changed my show to a hardcore, and I needed to know everything.
Right.
And this other woman that worked at WM, her name was Tina Glyptis, and she just totally took me under her wing.
Yeah.
And we started with the A's. Like it was like, okay, Angry Samoans, go. And then Blast, and all the way to like Naked Ray Gun or whatever. Like I just got a crash course in everything. And at that same time, people like Rob Watts were coming into my life, and there was this whole Marblehead, the Marblehead middle school quote unquote community. Yeah. And they were throwing hardcore shows, and they were having like members of the Descendants there, and like Eye for an Eye, and like what turned out later to be my daughter's like elementary school at the time was the Marblehead Middle School, and those kids were getting like crazy punk rockers to come play. And
Descendants played there.
All and all. And it was just so I was fully immersed.
Yeah.
And also it didn't hurt that hardcore boys were like my jam.
Right.
Like I was like, okay, because punk rock boys were a little too effeminate for me.
Yeah.
But hardcore dudes,
shaved heads.
Oh yeah, I was all over it. And then when they started to do sort of the precursor to emo, where they were singing about girls and about being in love, but still being hard as fuck, I was like, I am all in. This is it. This is it for me. I have found my people. You know. And then I just secretly had crushes on them forever and never said anything. Yeah, Dag Nasty for me is still one of my all-time favorite bands forever and ever. Amen. Yeah. And it's because they did marry that the sense of love lost and romance and crushing on women and or crushing on whoever. It didn't matter. It was something I could relate to. Yeah. It wasn't just about fuck the system, man. Because who cares at that point? You're hormonal. You just want to make out, you know. But yeah, to this day, like the fact that like Dave Smalley, that we're friends on Facebook or something, it's just like I still get excited. And the first time I met Brian Baker, who by that point was with Bad Religion, I mean, I gushed. Yeah. I was just like, Field Day is one of my favorite records of all time. And he's like, wow, that makes two of us. And I was like...
That's what was the next thing I was going to say. I think you and I...
the only people that love Field Day. Yeah. It's the Spanish flamenco guitar sound in it. For whatever reason, it just hit me in the sweet spot. And but that was the precursor to emo, was it not? I mean, I feel like it was. So
yeah, that and Embrace, Ian's band, and all that stuff sort of started happening, and then it kind of changed into bands that sound more like Weezer and the Get Up Kids and that kind of more
poppy.
Pop, I guess it would be called like pop punk at this point. But so you were kind of immersed in hardcore right until Nirvana. Yeah. Like right up, and then that just split everybody's world wide open, and we were along for the craziest ride ever. You know, it was like. We were at WM. At this point, I was, assistant PD and I was doing rap director stuff. But really, we were immersed in stuff that was going on in Seattle. Yeah. And begging for them to bring bands out here. Oh, yeah. Like, please, for the love of God, Tad. Can we see Tad or whoever? And, Nirvana just resonated with us in a way that nothing else had. And, it's difficult to talk about sometimes because it seems so, like, lame or trite at this point, but at the time it was the biggest fucking deal ever. Yeah, definitely. and I can remember going on summer break from college and coming back, and people were like, "Hey, I heard that friend's band of yours, Nirvana, like they're getting big now," and I'm like, "Well, they're not really my friends, but they literally took over the world in like 6 months' time." But that's. We were both at that Man Ray. Show,
yes, we were actually there as opposed to the thousands of people who said they were there. Yeah. We went and saw Nirvana with the Bags opening at Man Ray, which was a club that was not necessarily a hardcore. Well, it was hardcore. It wasn't necessarily a punk rock club, but it was the de facto, if you can't play anywhere else, you can play at Man Ray.
Yeah, every once in a while they'd have a show there.
Yeah, and FNX had just started loving Nirvana, and that was due to Kurt St. Thomas and his skateboard videos, really. That's how he found that. Yeah. But I will never forget that show. Chad Channing on drums. Yeah. Dwayne Bruce comes out and does the intro, which you can find on the internet, which is amazing. Yeah. But at the time, we were like, oh my God, he's really going to do the entire back of the Sub Pop t-shirt. Right. With the fudge packing, crack smoking, whatever,
Satan
the whole...
worshiping.
Yeah. And so he did the whole thing, and I can remember being a little squeamish inside going, oh God. And looking at Kurt Cobain, who was also going, oh, is he really going to do that? Like, it was that moment where you knew Dwayne was just so fucking excited. Oh, yeah. And I've been on the other side of that, where I've gone to intro a band that I was totally in love with, and you just make a total ass out of yourself. Right. I mean, it sounds great now, but I remember at the time being like, oh, good Lord. Oh, what's going on? But it was the sickest show. Yeah. We couldn't believe that, especially songs like About a Girl, that there wasn't a backup singer. Right. It was just Kurt.
3-piece, yeah.
The way he sang that specific song, I was just mesmerized, and we were right up front. Oh, yeah. And, of course, you had that sense that Chad Channing was not long for the band because they fucking destroyed every piece of his drum set. And you were just like, I think maybe they don't like him anymore.
I took a bunch of photos at that, which I've since gone missing, but some of them are.
I was going to say, I don't remember you showing those to me.
Well, two of them are in Kurt's Nirvana book, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
and my one of my ticket stub, I think, is in his book, and then
nice.
Amy had some ticket stubs as well. I mean, the Nirvana thing could be a whole podcast. Obviously, I'm sort of intertwined with that whole thing, but chronologically, yes, we go to that show, and that sort of breaks everything wide open. And I had decided that I was going to intern for Kurt St. Thomas. I had met him at various shows. Mm-hmm. I think I had actually run into him at a Soul Asylum show. Remember when they were cool?
Yeah.
And I said,
acoustic one, was it?
It was, and the horse they rode in on, and it was at the Paradise. Was it acoustic?
No. I think they played at a place in Cambridge. It was, they would have more like jazz.
Oh, like Green Street,
Not Green
maybe?
Street. It was in Central Square, Night Stage.
Oh,
they
yeah.
played there with
That,
Seven
I
League
never
Boots.
made it to Night Stage with 7 League Boots. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
What a great band.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm sorry. So you interned with Kurt.
Yeah, I basically
FNX.
ran into him backstage at the Soul Asylum show and said, I really want to. And we had always had a connection with FNX because certain people like Michael Bright or whoever would be advisors at Salem State for the radio division. So we already had a good back and forth. And I just said to Kurt, I want to be your intern. And he said, call me Monday morning. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And I became his intern, and he became my mentor. And I owe so much to him, you know. The fact that he ended up writing a book about Nirvana and doing probably one of the biggest, if not standalone, interviews with that entire band that became that Nevermind, It's an Interview disc. I worked very closely with him on that. I helped type everything up. And it was a total labor of love. It took forever, and it was something he had started well before Kurt passed away. But by that point, it had then become a mission. But so I was totally immersed in all of that stuff, which, to this day is still difficult to talk about. Because it was such a big, huge part of my life, and so ridiculously heartbreaking at the same time. And it's still, it's one of those things where I always end up telling people, someday we'll talk about it. Someday we'll talk about it, because it's not easy, you know.
And for people that don't know, WFNX was sort of the first major alternative college, what they would call college rock at that time.
We were the first terrestrial major market station to play them out of the box, I think. We were in a unique position. We were 3,000 watts, which is nothing. I mean, we're talking about 50,000 watt stations.
You couldn't get that in the next town over.
Piddly little signal, and yet had some of the best numbers of our lives ever because we broke that band. And not really just in this market, but certainly in this market. And, that was because we were so spoiled working there, because it's not like any other radio station in the country. And there was amazing things about that and terrible things about that, because it didn't set you up for a life in radio at all.
No.
But those times were the best times. Absolutely. I mean, you had like members of the Clash walking through the building, and even as an intern, I can remember, Joan Jett was here, and Mick Jones was there, and you were just like, and Joey Ramone, and we'd all climb out onto the roof. But somebody would put a really long, like 12-minute version of Every Day is Halloween from Ministry, and we'd all climb out on the roof and get high. And it was just pot. It was, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure there were other drugs going on there. In fact, I know there were. I just wasn't a part of that. Never was. But, I couldn't even. I've been stoned with so many fucking rock stars, and a lot of it is just because of that. It's so funny. I mean, we went out on the roof with everybody from Liz Phair to, the Soup Dragons, and it's just.
I wonder what they're doing now.
I don't know. I don't know. So it was an amazing time, and Jason Steve's movie kind of touches on that a lot. I mean, it's a whole movie about that, but it's one person, it's only one part of it, because as many people were there, that's how many stories there are. So. And
do you remember the first time you were kind of starstruck, like seeing like someone maybe you were like a huge fan of? And
I've been starstruck probably 2 times in my life. One was Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols, which is funny. We were backstage at the reunion tour, and it was a handful of us, and Dickie Barrett and I were both completely fucking starstruck and couldn't really speak.
Right.
Somebody introduced Dickie to Steve and said, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, whatever. And Dickie was like, oh, yeah, we're just a local band. Like he was
right. Yeah.
I was Dickie. But then I went I've never asked for autographs in my life.
Yeah.
I took my ticket stub and I remember giving it to Steve Jones and saying something, but it was like, and of course, years later, Dickie and I were both working at Indie 103 and Jonesy, we became co-workers eventually, but it's just, so I've been starstruck with them and I don't know, maybe like Mick Jagger, maybe. Only because he's so famous that his head looks 5 times as big as it actually is.
Right.
I had incredible luck through the 80s and the 90s. And one of those was that my best friend at the time worked for Don Law.
Yeah.
And when the Stones would come through town, they couldn't hook up people with free tickets. So what they did do is they would set aside the best seats in the house for friends and family, $50 a pop.
Right.
So they would set up shop in whatever hotel.
Yeah.
And Shelley Lazar was the point person for that, and she used to work with Bill Graham Presents. I mean, that woman could write some stories. Like, holy shit, did she tell me some stories? She's amazing. I got hired to help her sell tickets. And at one point, I'm walking from the Four Seasons over to the Orpheum box office with $50,000 in my backpack, picking up tickets. It was crazy. But, you would meet all the friends and family of the Stones. There's this one dude, and his name escapes me at the moment, but you can certainly find it easily. He's Keith Richards' best friend and was his dealer at one point or whatever, but had the same accent and spoke exactly like Keith. So I always feel confident that if I ever am in a room with Keith, I'm totally good. But it was amazing. And there was a point where, and of course, I had an extra little star on my shoulder because my name was Angie and the Stones, and so everyone was like remembered me. It was no way you couldn't. And so I took one of my favorite things to do if I ever had a +1 anywhere, I would take the biggest fan I knew. And so my friend Wendy was the biggest Stones fan I knew. And I brought her, and we're backstage, and there's a point where Mick is walking towards us, and he's like, "Hello, girls." And I look over at Wendy, and the blood is just completely drained out of her body, and I'm like, just breathe. Don't embarrass me. It was fine, but it was just he looked like a toothpick with a really giant head on it walking towards me. And I was just like, oh my God, that's Mick fucking Jagger, And in a way, I guess I interviewed Oprah at some point, and I wouldn't say I was necessarily starstruck. It's a nice moment. She gave us all hugs, and that was cool. I learned a lot from just watching her being interviewed. Nothing comes out of her mouth that hasn't been well thought out in her brain beforehand. She is the top of her game as far as being interviewed or interviewing somebody. It was like watching a masterclass. So that was pretty amazing. But starstruck, really just Jonesy. And then this odd, and we're friends now, so this is really weird. Diablo Cody. The writer. She was in my local Vons when I lived in LA. We were grocery shopping. And Kay, my best friend Kay Hanley, and I had been they were Twitter friends. So we would tweet back and forth. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, Diablo Cody's in the Vons and she's pregnant. And nobody knows she's pregnant, but I can see that she's pregnant. And I'm texting Kay like, Diablo Cody's here. Do I say something? Like, I've totally fangirled. Like huge fangirl. She's like, yes, you have to go talk to her. So I was like, I'm really sorry. You Diablo Cody? And she's like, I'm Kay Hanley's best friend. Just a total fucking nerd. And she was like, I love Kay Hanley. And she's been just a total love. So I think those are my biggest starstruck moments.
You had a funny Kid Rock story, I thought, at one point.
Even
though he's kind of
well, now he's kind of douchey, right? I mean, but he was amazing. So we were at the Warped Tour very early on, and he was playing the side stage that was like the back of a truck.
That's what he had the hair
I think his hair was cornrows. It wasn't Kid and Play hair. It was post Kid and Play hair. It was cornrows. And my friend Leanne, who worked for Atlantic at the time, said, I really want you to meet this artist of ours. We just signed him. I think you'll totally dig him. It's right up your alley. And so I met Kid Rock and what would later be Uncle Cracker, his DJ.
Right.
And we hung out, and he told me these stories of how there were these scams, these mother-daughter scams on the tour buses.
Yeah.
And how the mother would be in cahoots with the underage daughter who looked of age.
Yeah.
And would somehow get invited to fool around with somebody on the bus, and then she would shake them down for money when she showed up and went, this my daughter is 15. How dare you? Or whatever. Right. And there was this whole, and I was like, I've never heard of that. Oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So we had a great time hanging out. I went and saw him play and was like, oh, this is the thing.
Yeah.
And then he said, hey, we do this like after party thing with members of like, I don't even remember what band.
Yeah.
It might have been, it wasn't the Deftones because that was a different tour, but it was a jam. And it was all the bands from the Warped Tour. Huh. And then Kid Rock was like scratching records and shit.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, this is like a special thing,
yeah.
And it was really cool. And then he goes off and blows up. Like I come back to my PD and I'm like, dude, we really need to play this guy, whatever. Yeah. And then a year later, I'm at the Radio Music Awards in Las Vegas, and I get this clandestine interview where I've got to go down in the basement of Mandalay Bay, and there's security everywhere. And then suddenly it's just me and him and 5,000 other people in a dressing room, and they're all staring at me like, no pressure. And I was like, hey, we've come a long way since the Warped Tour. And, of course, he has no fucking idea who I am. Yeah. But Uncle Cracker, bless his heart, was like, D-Nice, because we had a whole conversation about D-Nice. Yeah. And he remembered me, and suddenly everybody was at ease. It was a great interview. Everybody was super happy and whatever. Yeah. So at the time, Kid Rock was all right. I guess Uncle Cracker saved my ass that day. So there you go. There's a quote for you to pull. Uncle Cracker saved my ass.
Where is he now?
I don't know, but he had a couple hits there for a hot minute. I think he made some money.
Yeah, definitely. So you had gone to LA at one point.
Oh yeah. We had gone from working at the greatest radio station in the world to working at the radio station that was playing Limp Bizkit and hiring hookers for parties.
Yeah.
True story.
Yeah.
And I was done.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had met my now ex-husband, Trevor, and he was a chef for Todd English. And it was an opportunity for us to kind of get out of Dodge. Yeah. And so I split. Yeah. And he got a job working for Todd opening the Olives at Bellagio. Mm-hmm. So I left. I went to Vegas. Yeah. Vegas didn't pan out too well. Right. I mean, I got married, had a kid, bought a house. I mean, that part was cool. But as far as... I was completely out of the business. Yeah. I worked in radio for 5 minutes when I got to Vegas and was like, nah, I think I'm going to do the other thing. And I just sort of dropped out. I used to joke that I was in the witness protection program. Right. And it's funny because bands would come through town and friends of mine and they were like, oh my God, you have a kid. And I was like, yeah, this is nuts. And, Ed V would come through with Juliana Hatfield or whatever. And I'm like, God, I really miss everybody. It's like I'm in a totally different life. Yeah. And eventually we moved to LA. Yeah. And Kurt St. Thomas is there, and Max Tolkoff was the PD at Indy, and suddenly, like, maybe we could put the band back together and do FNX all over again at Indy, and, I get reintroduced to Jonesy. Yeah. And I was like, well, and he was like, hello, love, whatever, super nice. And I was like, well, this is a lot better than last time I met you. I couldn't even complete a full sentence. He was like, what? I'm like, never mind, not important. And I did a great little, I did a weekend shift there, and Henry Rollins' show was on after me. Yeah. Now, Henry Rollins is the only guy I've ever written a fan letter to in my life. Yeah. Like, ever.
Did he reply?
He did. He used to reply to everybody. You remember that on the postcard? 31661 or whatever?
213. Yeah.
Oh, is it 216?
213. Yeah.
213, whatever.
I have a tattoo right here.
Do you have a tattoo? No. Oh. I had that postcard up in my office forever. Yeah. So... I loved Henry. Obviously, I loved his musicianship and his being a frontman, but his spoken word is what really got me. Yeah. And so I just wrote him this letter like, dude, you just fucking get it. It's nice, whatever. And he wrote me back this great little postcard. So I there was definitely some hero worship there for him. So his show every week on Indy on Saturday nights was pre-recorded. Yeah. Until one night. Yeah. I'm sure it wasn't always pre-recorded, but in my particular time. Mm-hmm. So I'm just about to sign off and click into automated, for the rest of the night. Yeah. And the studio door busts open, literally busts open. Yeah. And here comes Henry Rollins. He's like, doing the show live tonight. I'm Henry. Nice to meet you. Blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, like, I was like, okay, great. Like suddenly I was Minnie Mouse. I couldn't even speak. And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So, I got out of there and said my goodbyes or whatever. I'm like, well, there's your full circle moment, Angie. So I guess that sort of goes into the starstruck thing too a little bit. But like I said, I've been very fortunate to cross paths with a lot of people.
Yeah. How about bad experiences with famous people? I'm sure there's been a few.
We had a lot of comedians come up to the station. They were not all awesome.
No,
I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Do you remember Richard Jenny, the platypus man?
Yeah, he died. Yeah.
That guy was a fucking cock.
Yeah.
Like he was just a jerk and like was slimy walking in. You could just feel dirty hanging out with him, and that was not fun.
No.
I had it's like any given Sunday, you know, like I love Lenny Kravitz. I have always loved Lenny Kravitz. And he was snowed in for a weekend when he was supposed to be in New York for the Rolling Stone or, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Yeah. And so he gets snowed in. So the record company says, well, we'll set up some radio interviews for you while you're at the hotel, which is great, except his record's been out for a year or whatever. And I forgot the first rule of interviewing, which is you always butter up your subject first. Like you have to in one way or another, I love your record. This song resonates with me. What have you? Like it's a nice, hi, how are you? Yeah. And I forgot.
Like the bundt cake I brought you today. That's downstairs.
Yes, thank you very much for my bundt cake. No problem. So I walked in there and immediately wanted to talk about his episode of House of Style with Cindy Crawford because he took her to Roscoe's for chicken and waffles. And I'm like, nobody else is going to talk to him about that. I am in. Right, so, we start talking about that and he just looks at me. Yeah. And he goes, aren't you going to ask me about the record? And I was like, right, of course. And by that point, he was so pissed off at me that I could hear in my head when I had 3 good sound bites to bring back to the station, and I stopped the interview. Yeah. And he was like, that's it? I'm like, yep, that's it. Thank you so much for your time. And I ran out of there. I think I cried. Yeah. I couldn't listen to Lenny Kravitz music for a while. Neil Robert, I bring the stuff, and he goes, what the fuck happened? He goes, this is what you get from Lenny Kravitz. And I was like, it was terrible. And for 2 years, anytime the song came on, I couldn't even listen to it. Yeah. Like it was a pain in my stomach. Like it was a bad breakup. It was awful. Yeah. And then the Radio Music Awards in Vegas one year, they're like, okay, so Lenny Kravitz is next. And I was like, oh God. And he was sunshine and unicorns and rainbows shooting out of his ass and a big hug and kiss, and all was forgiven. Yeah. So that was good.
He's a little tiny guy, isn't he? From what I hear.
Yeah, he seems so larger than life. But I would say 90% of the people I meet, I'm 5'10", and as you know, I'm not a petite flower, and most of the people you meet are small. Yeah. Aidan Quinn was very tall, freakishly tall. That like totally shocked me. Yeah. But most people, you're not looking down on them, but you are when you're interviewing them. Yeah. Ben Stiller, great interview. He literally came up to my chest. Yeah. Just I could put him in my pocket. Yeah. Christina Aguilera was like a Hummel. I mean, just like a little pixie thing. Yeah. I was like, how do you even survive? Right. Yeah. So God, I really have a lot of stories, don't I? Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's what we're looking for.
It's tough though, because they're stories and they're moments in my life, but they are misconstrued as me bragging when I tell them.
Yeah. No, I don't think anyone would ever get that.
Okay.
I
hope not.
That. No, I think, a lot of my friends and of course my dad, was in the business, and so I'm just used to people.
Yeah, for you it was not. Yeah, but it was definitely an interesting thing for my family. Yeah. There was a sense, and it's very New England. Yeah. That you're getting too big for your britches. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And when I talked about hanging out with Pearl Jam the weekend we found out Kurt Cobain had died, it was very important to me that I was around like-minded people, and it just so happened that they were in town, and it was very heavy. Yeah. And I came home to tell my family about it, and my brother was like, it immediately became a rag-on session and a joke, and did you get Eddie Vedder's toilet paper? Right. And like for years, they would just mercilessly torture me, which is the New England way. Yeah. But it's
Eddie Vedder, huh?
Yeah. You ever met so-and-so? And you're like, oh, God, whatever. But then, it's all fine when you get them tickets to shows and stuff. Yeah. No, I know, right? But no, I mean, that's very typical New England. You don't get too big for your britches. Kay and I talk about that a lot. Yeah. She grew up in Dorchester, and there was a point where she kind of torpedoed Letters to Cleo a little bit because she felt like she didn't deserve that next level. Yeah. And that's very New England. Yeah. You just don't.
No. No,
you know?
I think that's why you've become successful and just always been on the level, as they say, because I never got that vibe from you. And
well, that's cool. I'm glad. But it's always in the back of my mind that people are like, oh, she's just a star fucker, and she's just. I remember somebody calling me a star fucker once, and I was like, first of all, I wish I was a star fucker. I never fucked any of those people. I didn't even make out with any of them. I would have liked to. But that's another interesting thing about being on the radio. The bands don't fuck with the radio people. Yeah. Well, at least that was a rule back then.
Yeah.
Because the DJ of today is the program director of tomorrow. And if you fuck somebody over, it's going to come back to bite you in the ass.
Yeah, so radio, at one point, that was, for most people, that's where you discovered music. And then that doesn't really
and then that goes away.
Yeah. So what happened at FNX? Just went out of business at one point.
Yeah, I think that, they went from being this little extension of a newspaper and were basically left alone.
Yeah.
And then, the boon of Nirvana changed everything. And suddenly they were making money, real money, even with a piddly little signal like that. And, then you've got, consultants and advisors and too many, and newspaper men trying to put their 2 cents in with radio people.
Yeah.
And a lot of bad management, a lot of, people, the higher ups just not making good choices. And then, we weren't getting paid a lot, but it didn't matter because we were doing what we loved. And then eventually it becomes not what you love.
Right.
And then you change the format around and fuck with it so much that your listeners aren't with you anymore. And so I think it was just a perfect storm of shit. Yeah. And by the time they tried to resurrect it at the end, it was too late. And then, Stephen Mendich, he had a chance to sell that and make money. Yeah. Who wouldn't?
Right.
That's what you do. And radio isn't, what it was back then. And we were, like I said, we were totally spoiled, and it was an amazing situation. And then, I dropped out, got married, had a kid. And by the time I decided to get back into radio, it had fucking completely changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was no place to go.
Right.
I never had that experience where I showed up someplace and didn't have a full-time job right away.
Right. Yeah.
And, here we are. When did I move back to Boston? Like 2012?
11 or 12, yeah.
And I'm still part-time in radio, and not by choice.
Right,
There's just nothing. I mean, granted, Boston is number 10, top 10 in the country for our market. So people don't leave.
Yeah, yeah.
They stay in their jobs until they're fired or they pass away, essentially. Yeah. So I do everything I can. I'm on the hustle. I have 5 jobs, as you know. Yeah. And but it became a much different animal. It wasn't the money maker it had once been. Is it still viable? Yes. Does it still make money? Yes. Yeah. The cool thing about this recent merger and my new company. Yeah. I'm still with ZLX, which is interesting to go from the alternative world to classic rock. And then in the middle of that, your music that you grew up playing is now considered classic rock. And you're like, all right, whatever, I'll go with that. But they actually encourage us to talk. We now have extra breaks to talk, which means I get to be a personality again. Because they went from this thing where, we don't want you talking. We just want the music to play. Yeah. Well, anybody who's really into music is not listening to terrestrial radio. They're seeking out exactly what they want. Spotify, Apple Music, whatever it is, So they finally appreciate the live and local aspect and that you are a personality and it's like somebody's hanging out with you. And that's always been my style. I've never been a puker. Do you know what that means?
No.
Hey, everybody, it's time to play a new song, And I was always of the... We're having a conversation. Yeah. We may not know each other in person, but I'm absolutely talking to you. And I hope that comes across. And so now I get to focus again on being a really good personality on the air, as opposed to, I only get to talk twice an hour, so I'll do the other jobs that I have to do and get the scheduling done and the production, whatever it is, So I'm in a really good headspace right now about it. Yeah. But there, when you look back, some of those motherfuckers were making 6 figures doing next to nothing. Yeah. And now you're just trying to piecemeal, a $30,000 a year life, it's crazy, but it'll find its way. I mean, we all thought the post office was dead too. Right. And then Amazon came along, eventually things find their way. Yeah. And, as long as there are cars, as long as there are people commuting, podcasts and terrestrial radio are the way to go. So,
and, So MP3s and downloading and that stuff obviously had a big, and I think just how younger people listen to music now.
It's amazing.
Different.
And it's funny. We were discussing this last night. We were watching a movie that was based in 1983, and there's a scene of some people getting very excited and bonding over. There were a couple people in the crowd that recognized a Psychedelic Furs song, and I was trying to explain to the younger people in our crew that were watching the movie that was a fucking thing.
Yeah.
You didn't just love that music. You went to the show not only to see the band, but to find your people, because there was no internet.
Right.
We had fanzines that you could pick up at Newbury Comics, but that was it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Flipside was my Bible.
Yeah.
But how was I supposed to find my people? And I can remember the first Lollapalooza.
Yeah.
We walked into Great Woods, and you got to be fucking shitting me. Everybody here loves the music that I love, because we grew up where it was a handful of people in high school, a handful of people in middle school, whatever. Yeah, and so they don't need that anymore.
Right.
You can find everything you need on your phone. You don't need to go see live music to find your people. You certainly don't need them to find people to date.
Yeah.
You know, and you don't need to go to a record store and purchase the music and be part of that community anymore. You can do it online. So it's all changing. I don't want to be the curmudgeon that's like, music was so much better and music sucks now.
Yeah.
Anybody who says that is just woefully ignorant. There's always good music to be found. And luckily in towns like Boston and, you know, over the river in Cambridge, hell, fuck, even in Salem, you can find a good band to see pretty much any night of the week.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
There's always good stuff going on. You choose not to seek it out or whatever, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But don't go around saying there's no good music. There's always good music.
And I've noticed, too, I think younger people now aren't so genre consistent like we were, where you'd be like, I'm a hardcore guy now.
Yep.
You know, now
dude, like you could even get down to the label.
Yeah.
What kind of music do you like? I'm into SST and a little twin tone. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now it's the festivals you'll see like Fish and Kendrick Lamar and you know.
Well, festivals are the only tours that are making money, although I think that's starting to go away too. I mean, a very telling sign is you look at the Boston Calling lineup versus the Coachella lineup.
Yeah.
There are no guitar bands on the Coachella lineup.
Yeah.
I mean, almost none.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a reason for that. They don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
They're after the younger dollar, and why wouldn't they be? It's disposable income.
Yeah.
And those kids don't give a fuck. And even when you go to Boston Calling, there are so many kids there who are, they might as well be at Canopy Lake Park.
Right. Yeah,
they're just going.
Yeah.
You know, and the bands are just kind of extra.
Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting situation.
Yeah. Does that bum you out as like a music person?
I don't know if it bums me out. I mean, I'm older now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no getting around that. And up until like maybe early 40s, I'm 48 now.
Yeah.
I was still like, I still have my finger on the pulse. I still know what's going on. Now I got stepkids that listen to shit and I've never heard of it. And I'm just like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Like the other day, Cameron was like, the band Peach Pit, like he was talking about hipsters or whatever. I said, you mean Passion Pit? He goes, no, I mean Peach Pit. I go, what are you talking about? That's a fucking scene from 90210. He's like, it's a band. And I was like, oh my God, I'm old. It's done. I'm dying. You know, but I love like Cage the Elephant.
Yeah.
Why are they not the biggest fucking band in the world right now? Because guitar, rock and roll no longer matters to the masses. Yeah. But that's the thing. It's cyclical. You know, rock and roll had a really good run. Yeah. And it's done. Yeah. And it'll happen again in a new way, in a new fashion at some point. But right now it's, you know, it's middle of the road. Yeah. It's dancey, it's EDM, it's hip hop has taken over everything. To the point where they're redneck country hip hop shit now. Like they've totally stolen the culture and made it their own. And you're like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah,
like
that's a little much for me.
And, you know, while I appreciate Dave Grohl and everything he's done, and I love the Foo Fighters, like, they're not the only goddamn fucking rock band out there. And so in that way, it does bum me out a little bit. But then I go to Boston Calling and I see a band like Cage the Elephant. The lead singer is Mick fucking Jagger. He's a superstar. He has it. Yeah. And you didn't see that with all the bands with the extra little drum set up front and the fucking mandolin. And you're just like... I get it. Like kids love that shit. It's safe. It's easy. It's poppy. You know, it doesn't challenge you.
Right.
You know, and so, but rock and roll, that's what rock and roll is supposed to reflect the times. So, or music is supposed to reflect the times. And right now, those times are being reflected in hip hop.
Yeah.
And in music that you listen to escape your life.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
And so you're on ZLX now, which is Boston's
only classic rock.
So you probably hear when I was driving here. We've had it on in the car driving here, and then last night too. I think I've messaged you. We were listening to you, and you were on the air.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm always, Saturday 37.
Yeah. And I'm always surprised at what they play because I think we heard "Shot in the Dark" by Ozzy.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, Jay got.
We're sort of reevaluating some of the music now too. And just for a long time, we were stuck in a holding pattern. And there's a certain part of programming these days where back in the old days, you had a PD that had ears.
Right,
you had a music director that had ears. And I'm not saying ours don't. I mean, we got Carter Allen. That man's a motherfucking legend.
Yeah.
However, you're owned by much bigger fish, and they want music testing. They want facts and figures to back up why you're playing such and such. So, and then the ratings, you kind of can't get around that no matter what. You can't be a lifestyle station. You got to make money. Yeah. So, it's a lot of fun right now. It's kind of the wild, wild west. Yeah. And I'm really digging it because we got so locked into, I love Pink Floyd, but my God, there's a lot of Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
And I feel like what's happening right now is, yesterday I was playing Joan Jett, Bad Reputation, and Steelers Wheel stuck in the middle. And to me, it was fantastic. Yeah. I love, because is it nostalgic? Yes.
Right.
But you're also dealing with a completely younger generation who's discovering this stuff for the first time. And you have to be respectful of that too. Right. It's not just about nostalgia anymore. And as your audience gets older, you have to go for your younger audience. Yeah. So I'm having a ton of fun right now, but I'm also having a ton of fun being your cruise director. So I am playing the soundtrack to your afternoon for sure. Mm-hmm. But it's not about like, I've got to play you this new band that I saw last night. I mean, and that's where somebody like Angel Wood gets the best of both worlds because she's doing Boston emissions and she's, hyping up all the local music. And the local music scene here is so fucking rich. It's really fantastic. Yeah. And I love being fully immersed in that. Yeah. I'd much rather go see, to be honest with you, and perhaps this is my age showing, I'd much rather go see my local Boston rock community doing tribute nights to Tom Petty and Prince or whoever than I would going to see the Killers at Avalon. Do you know what I'm saying? To me, it's just a lot more fun. It's social. It's a hang, and
you see all your friends.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, there's definitely still bands where I'm like, we need to go see this band, and I need you to not talk to me while they're on stage, which used to be all the time, and now it's just occasionally I need you to shut the fuck up because I have to watch this band. And like Royal Blood was one of those bands, even though they're just a two-piece. I was just fascinated by the way they could create that sound and how. And here's an interesting question for you: is it nostalgia, and does it matter when you hear bands like? Let's even go back to Silver Sun Pickups. Yeah. And how is that not the embodiment of Smashing Pumpkins' Gish?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so you hear a band like Royal Blood that takes the best parts of the 90s grunge scene and chops them up for you and puts them in a new place. So are you happy? Are they like an important band because of that? Or are you just connecting to the nostalgia of what you know and what's familiar? And does it matter?
I think it's a little of both. I think that's great because I think it does give people like us a nostalgic feel, and it's cool to, I think, see. I'm just assuming these bands are younger than me, but it's always great for me when I see younger people being influenced by stuff I grew up listening to, because I think the stuff I grew up listening to, hardcore and punk and that stuff, they were aping, the Stooges or
absolutely
stuff
right.
And stuff. So
I mean, Nirvana, Sabbath. I mean, it's like a 1-2 punch, right?
Yeah.
And I love that a kid will go see that band and then get turned on to another
discover
band.
other stuff.
Yeah.
And that's how we did it. And,
yeah. It's that education being paid forward. And I love doing it with the kids too, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little more difficult because so much of what, like, my daughter is totally into like Broadway shit, which I have it's so funny, like the one fucking thing.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be the coolest rock and roll parent of all time, and my kid found the one goddamn loophole.
Right.
Like, I'm really into Hamilton, and I'm like, I can't even get you tickets to that shit. Like, fuck. What am I going to do? But like my honorary stepson, I say that they're my stepkids. We Brady Bunched, Dave and I Brady Bunched our family up in July, and I've taken on that role.
Yeah.
And Colin is 15, and he's a huge hip hop fan. Why wouldn't he be? You know, it's Kendrick Lamar all over the place. And he can't wait to share music with me every time I'm in the car.
Yeah.
And we bonded over Action Bronson because that's somebody part of the newer, dare I say, community that I'm into. Because for me, I started hip hop when it started, and bands that were important to me were like the first 2 Public Enemy records. And you know, we used to go to all the hip hop shows at the Channel and shit, Ice Cube, whoever, and like to me, it was far more melodic than the hip hop of today. A lot of the hip hop I hear today seems more spoken word-ish to me. And so we still find commonality, and then Cameron's like a huge comedian junkie. So we talk comedians, and loves Eugene Merman.
Oh, nice.
And like fell over that I'm friendly with Eugene Merman because he used to come up on FNX when nobody knew who the fuck he was, and he was the strangest motherfucker on the planet. And he's lovely, and I adore him. And so you do find those ways to connect with your kids, which is pretty cool. And makes, you know, getting old bearable. Right. I guess we're kind of off the subject, but sorry. All over the place.
When I was in L.A., and I don't know if you were visiting or if you were still there, but we went to see...
I know. How many times have we been back and forth in L.A.? It is our other home. Can we just say that? Like, we have 2 homes. We have Boston and we have L.A. for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I played Action Bronson in the car for you, and you hated it.
Really?
Yeah.
When was that?
It was the Dr. Lecter.
Okay. But somewhere along the line, I kept at it for sure. Yeah. And the whole cooking thing I love about him.
Yeah. And we went to see The Descendants.
We had a great time. We went to FYF Fest.
Yeah.
Or is it just FYF?
Yeah, it's FYF. I think
right,
because
it's Fuck Yeah Festival, right? So we went to that right when I was getting ready to leave LA, right?
Yeah.
So...
Guided by Voices.
Guided by Voices. Bob Pollard was just fucking hammered that night. But I had never actually seen The Descendants. Yeah. I don't think. Although I have a picture right out in my bedroom with Milo and what's his face, Carl. Yeah. So I must have seen them at some point. Yeah. But I don't remember it. So it was a big deal for us to go to that. Yeah. And it was so great.
Yeah. And that's the show that, if you've seen the documentary, that show's featured throughout that movie.
Yeah. So. They're just one of those great bands that I can pick up and listen to at any time, at any place. And it's just fantastic.
Yeah, it's timeless.
Yeah, it's absolutely timeless. And just pure fucking power punk rock.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they're definitely like one of our sort of Beatles, I think, that I can just...
Yeah,
always play.
Totally.
It's relatable stuff.
And it's funny because, as I had confessed to you in the past, for me, for a long time, All was a bigger thing for me. But again, All tapped the emo chorus sweet spot for me.
Yeah, they were a little more...
She's My Ex, Just Perfect. I mean, all that stuff. I was like, I love it. It's so me. Like, it was like tailor-made for me. It was the best of all worlds. So, but yeah, those are bands we can't like sort of forget to nod. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And then... but then I can run the gamut. I love the Deftones. I love Tool. Getting to see Tool at Boston Calling was a fucking thing for me. Yeah. I don't even know it if I had probably seen them once, maybe. Right. Christ, we've been to so many shows. Like, I have to go back and look at my notes. Yeah. Because I used to keep copious journals, and I would have all the names of the bands I would see that night on the top of the page. Yeah. And there was a time when I was on the house list of every club in Boston because I was doing the morning show and I was going out and reviewing all these shows. Right. And I would see, there were nights when we would start it out at an early show with the Sunny Day Real Estate. Right. And then we'd be over to see Mooney Suzuki. And then I ended the night with Space Hog opening upstairs at the Middle East, and they came out playing Thin Lizzy Jailbreak.
Oh, yeah.
That was one evening for me.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
it was just, I'm very, very, very lucky.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
And in Boston, too, I think music fans are, especially people that were here in the 90s and 80s, were very lucky to... I made a spreadsheet at one point of...
Did you really?
All the show. It was more to when I got laid off, I wanted to practice using Excel. So while I was just so I could still be sharp with it. So I started going through all my ticket stubs and making this.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
But yeah, there'd be one week where I'd be like, geez, one night I saw Juliana Hatfield and the Rollins Band. The next night, and then I went to like the WWF or some stupid
Yeah. Oh,
like
totally.
that.
And how many shows did we go that we didn't know each other or didn't realize? I mean, it's got to be hundreds at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just lost my train of thought there.
Yeah,
but you know what it is? LA had the same amount of bands.
Yeah.
However, the crowds were completely fucking different.
Yeah.
It was a social thing.
Oh, yeah.
There was no, I felt like it was very disrespectful to artists.
Oh, it was very different. Yeah, coming from here where people are fucking nuts about stuff. And
I mean, they had the same availability, yet it was a totally different vibe. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're really lucky to be here.
Yeah, because I saw The Cure in L.A. in 2011, and they did...
was that the Pantages Theater thing? Did we
maybe.
both go to that? We didn't go together. I know that. I went with my friend Trent, but
the
first 3 albums or something? Yeah.
But Morrissey was playing the same night, and I just remember thinking that would never happen in Boston. They would never book those two fucking people.
Although with Morrissey, 9 times out of 10, he's either going to show up and leave early.
Right.
I can remember seeing one show with him. Oh, my God. I think it was like in Lowell, maybe.
Yeah.
And Smoking Popes were opening, who were fucking fantastic. That band should have been much bigger. And I felt like there was actually a point in the show where Morrissey walked off stage and went, "We've got those dinner reservations, right?" And then went back on the stage and taunted people to come up.
Right.
And like come up on stage, and the fucking second they did, show's over.
Right.
And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you just wanted to make your fucking dinner reservations, didn't you? Like, that kind of shit still.
That was a thing with the Smiths. When I saw them at the Opera House, I think, Meat is Murder, they invited, it was like hundreds of people on stage at the end.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The first time and the only time I saw the Smiths was at Great Woods.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, just later that year.
That was
Queen is Dead. Yeah. I mean, that first year Great Woods was open, man. That was a good fucking time.
Yeah.
You could buy a ticket for $13 for the lawn, and as soon as the lights went out, you could run up front because they didn't have security like they do now and fences and what have you. But Jesus, we saw some fucking killer shows there.
Yeah.
And the tours like New Order and
Sugar Cubes and Pill.
In Excess and the Sugar Cubes, Pill. Gene Loves Jezebel. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
20 kilohertz. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a good period of music. But,
the Pixies. Do you remember the Pixies play with Love and Rockets opening? And it was like one of those golden circle things because there was something else going on that night. I don't know if it was a Pats game or whatever it was where they did like an intimate quote unquote performance because they couldn't sell it out.
Yeah.
But I remember people like it was very important whenever you went to go see the Pixies, were you going to be on Kim's side of the stage?
Right.
You had to be on Kim's side of the stage. And then of course years later I'm neighbors with Joey Santiago and our kids are friends and that's so fucked up like and awesome. And you know, Joey was another parent. He was a friend, and we would hang out in the schoolyard while the kids were playing. And he was like, I remember the first time we went up to FNX, and he's telling me how he and Kim Deal were drunk, and they went up, and he's telling me the story, and I'm listening to it, and we're hanging out, and on the inside, I'm like, oh my God, it's Joey fucking Santiago, who's like this guitar god. I used to have a picture of him on my wall, like the whole band on the wall. Yeah. And, you know, so I immediately get home and call Kat Corbett, who's now on K-Rock, but we were interns together at FX, and I'm like, Joey Santiago just told me the story the first time they were up at FNX. I can't fucking believe it, you know? It's like, my life is just so fucking funny.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you mentioned the Patriots a minute ago, and they're about to play a football game in a few minutes.
It's a big football game. It's the AFC Championship game?
Yeah. And I live like 5 minutes from there, so it's kind of a fucking traffic nightmare over there right now.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so thanks for doing this. I think this was great.
Yeah?
And,
I could talk for like 16 more hours. Let's do it right now. Just kidding. No, I mean, I have to say, I love I love your podcast. I love you as a person, obviously. But the thing I love most about this podcast is that you are an archivist. It's an oral history, and it's important. And there's so much, especially in the Boston music scene, but all over, movie, comedy, what have you, that falls through the cracks and people forget all about it. And I think it's important. I loved listening to people like Kevin Patey and some of the stuff. I didn't know about all the Elliott Smith stuff, or whatever. And even Keith Bennett and things I didn't know about Keith. And, I think it's fantastic. And I'm honored that you asked me to be on it. So thank you.
Thank you.